Hello and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast. I am absolutely so excited to introduce Melissa Kim Corter on for a third time. She's the only guest I've had on for 3 episodes because I love her so much. She's a fellow shadow worker. We have so much in common. And when we get online, we could just chat about these things for endless hours. So if you haven't checked out our last episodes that we did together, we did one on Jungian shadow work, depth psychology. We did one on moving from darkness to light, all about shadow work. And today we dive into Dark Night of the Soul. I love Melissa. I feel like we have such good chemistry. She is an expert in this field, and she is about to release her 3rd book. And she's also about to wrap up her PhD in psychology and Jungian archetype studies. So I know you're going to love this podcast. I know it. I'm sure of it. If you do, please take a moment to give us a like, a share, and a subscribe. And I'm going to hop on in with Melissa. I hope you'll enjoy. Hello, and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast, a place to explore possibility through mindfulness, movement, and self-discovery. Our intention is to deliver insight and inspiration while fostering conversations that are genuine, unfiltered, and deeply human. We hope you will enjoy today's episode. Hello, Melissa. Welcome to the Connected Community Podcast.
Hi, Nikki. I'm so excited to be back with you. We have such great conversations. It's so much fun.
I know I'm saying this. I think you're my favorite guest ever. I've done a few episodes with 2 people, but I've never done one with 3. And obviously that's how much I love you.
I feel so special. Thank you.
I feel like we could do 50 episodes and we wouldn't need to prepare them or anything. We could just do them on the fly.
Right? Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many great things that come up just when we chat and connect. It's like, even just in the planning phases, I feel like they are episodes themselves because we just go so deep in our conversations, which is lovely.
Yes. So people haven't checked out the past episodes. We did one on Jungian shadow work, depth psychology, about a year ago. And then we did another one on shadow work, moving from darkness to light. And I think the reason that you and I connect so well is we both love playing in the shadows and we're both shadow workers. Absolutely. And today we're going to talk about Dark Night of the Soul, which I love.
Yes, me too.
I love. It's like, what's the most powerful point in somebody's life is the Dark Night of the Soul.
Right. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. That's such a great way to say that, actually. It's so true. Once we kind of reflect and look back and go, oh, okay. That's what all that was about.
Yes. Not when we're in it, but when we're through it.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes, right? Maybe, but I have not been blessed with that kind of wisdom while in the throes of it. It usually came a little bit later for me.
Yeah. So for people that do not know you, you are almost finished with your PhD in depth psychology and Jungian archetype studies, which I could go off on a tangent on that. And you're a certified death investigator, which is super fascinating and interesting. And you're about to release your 3rd book. Is it your 3rd book?
It is. Yeah, it's my 3rd book. I've had lots of smaller kind of like self-published things in between. But my 3rd official, I would say good, big girl book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Super exciting. So exciting.
So we will definitely dive into that a little bit later, but I want to dive into Dark Night of the Soul because there's so much to cover and I love this topic. And I don't think it's talked about a lot, or people hear it and they don't even know what it means. And so what would you say is the Dark Night of the Soul?
Such a good question. You know, I've had a few of them throughout my life, and each one was radically different. So there are variables when we talk about the Dark Night of the Soul, or different ways it might sort of materialize for each one of us. But for me, the most pivotal, I would say, was probably just a couple of years ago when I got really sick. So sometimes an illness can kind of be the Dark Night of the Soul for us. And even though there was like a physical component to my physical body, what it was going through, there was also a very deep psychological and emotional process. And so with the dark night of the soul, through what we might say is like a Jungian lens, might look different than through other philosophies and things like that. So I'll kind of speak to it from that perspective, just because that tends to be my experience. So there is this sort of, even though there's a physical nature to this process, and it is a process, it's such a deep process of change and transformation, and a breaking down of what's known, a breaking down of our identities and our perspective, the roles that we have. But there's a psychological process as well, where things are almost like we get this sense of being disoriented, like things aren't making sense. What we thought was true maybe doesn't hold any longer. The things that we were drawn to, resonated by, are no longer captivating us or exciting us about life. And it can be extremely painful. So through my illness, when I went through it, it just happened to be, I was on the edge of this very strange time. It was the peak of my career, or what I thought was the peak of my career. I was in a radically different industry. I was more deeply immersed in like spirituality and things of that nature, which I still love. But at the time, I was teaching and speaking from a different perspective. And when I got sick and went through this process, which lasted a couple of weeks, I didn't think I was going to make it out of it. So there was the fear of not returning. There was the fear of dying. There was a fear of just what's going to happen to my family, what's going to happen, all these questions, right? So it looks different for each one of us, but in mine, not only did I physically have to go through the illness, the healing of the body and all of that, but when I came out of that time, I was so different, and I had to contend with that too. I wasn't the same person, and I burned everything to the ground in my life. My entire business was shut down. I released 99% of my clientele. I shut my memberships down, and I had no plan. But there was something through this process, this dark night of the soul process, that made it unavoidable. There's almost this feeling of, I don't have a choice. There's no turning back. There's only going forward. I don't even know what that looks like. I have no clue how I'm going to make it through this or where I'm even headed. So all of those kind of components, I've heard from clients or students or colleagues that they have a similar kind of like sense of disorientation, of a collapse of things that are familiar, safe, comforting. Now, that can be physical things in our world, relationships, jobs, career, things of that nature. But emotionally and psychologically, we also go through a dark night of the soul. And another way to say this is an ego death. The part of us that relates to our outer world is shifting from external focus to honoring the unfolding of the soul. And that reorientation sounds like it would be magical and amazing and fun. And yeah, let's listen to the soul. It can be heart-wrenching and difficult. So that was kind of my major pivotal one. And just fun little story I'll tack onto that briefly is that when I did come out of that, burn the business to the ground, all of those things, I tried to get back into my work a little bit, and I couldn't. Things kept disappearing, including a hard drive with 20 years of all of my classes, all my workshops. I had been teaching, speaking, writing, doing all of these things. That hard drive was completely wiped out. And the only thing that remained on that hard drive was the manuscript for my book, which became my shadow workbook. And then my whole world just reoriented around that. As painful as it was, that process, I now know looking back, I wouldn't have let go of those things had they not kind of been stripped away through the initiation of that illness.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a story.
Yeah. Yeah, it was painful.
I'm kind of curious about
crazy.
like being in it, like the awareness of what was happening when you're in the muddiness of it. Can you speak to that? I know it's a strange question.
No, it's actually it's a really important question. I feel like, right, it's, for me, there was phases almost, not in any particular order or anything, but there was this sense of, oh, I'm not well. I must take care of myself. I need to advocate for myself. But underneath that, there was this feeling of like, this doesn't feel like a normal, ordinary cold flu situation where you spend time in bed and you rest and you're okay. I felt something really deep was happening, but I couldn't identify it. It was this overwhelming feeling. And then my physical body started to kind of mirror that same awareness with what it was going through just on a physical level. And then emotionally and psychologically, I went into this really deep, dark cave within myself. It's the only way I can describe it is I felt like I was in a cavern. It was almost very mythical and
Hmm.
very like metaphorical. It really was this cave. It was dark. I was alone. I felt separated from the world. I felt separate from my sense of self. I had people who were kind of like checking in and trying to get a hold of me and see if I was okay. A lot of people at that time knew I was really ill and they were concerned. And one of my dear mentors actually sent a message that I saw a couple days later, and she was like, "Please come back to us." And I just thought that was so
Wow.
interesting. So I was deep in this place, and that's what it felt like. I felt unreachable. I felt like myself, but a very scared, small version of myself. I felt like being in that place was frightening, but also somehow oddly protective. Like I needed to be there. And weird stuff happened while I was in that place. So, for example, I was also in the middle of this radical coursework I had to do for my PhD. I had a huge project due. There was no way I couldn't lift my head off the pillow, let alone do anything
Mm.
of substance that would make any kind of sense to
Hmm.
anyone. But I somehow did. I don't even vaguely remember going to my laptop or picking it up or typing out what I did, let alone passing. And in fact, one of my professors later emailed and said, "You were really ill. I assumed you were just not going to be able to work on this assignment." And I'd have no recognition or recollection of completing it. So some part of
Yeah.
me just kicked in and got things done and took over, but I don't know what that part of me is, to be honest with you. So there were these
Mm.
weird happenings like that while I was in it. At the same time, there was a lot of brain fog. There was a lot of, what am I doing? Am I going to make it out of this? There was a lot of fear. Uh, Underneath that fear was this feeling of holding on. I was like gripping for life. It's strange to say because if you were to observe me, you probably would have seen this woman lying in her bed, right?
Yeah.
Just very ill. But internally, I felt like I was clinging, holding on. I felt like things were being stripped away, layers. It was I was having weird fever dream kind of experiences. I couldn't tell. I'm like, am I hallucinating? What's happening? All of these kind of things. And some people will have this when they go through like a spiritual crisis, which is also what some think the dark night of the soul really is. But it can happen physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I
Yeah.
really feel like that's what was happening at that time.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm running through all these different scenarios of these things that I've been through in my life. And it's making me wonder, what is the true definition of a dark night of the soul? Like, how do
Hmm.
we, because some people will have, say, a car accident and they
Yeah.
think they're going to die and it changes their entire trajectory in their whole life, and that's a dark night of the soul moment for them, where other
Yeah.
people might have that exact same experience and they just kind of move on, or it doesn't have that impact, or it has a slight impact but not to the same extent. So if somebody's listening and they're trying to figure out, was this a dark night of the soul moment, would they be 100% clear, yes it was,
Hmm.
or are some of them more subtle, or like how do you decipher what it is?
Yeah. That's a really great question. You know, my mind wants to say it can be both. I really feel like it doesn't have to be always so painful or always so intense. especially if we look at it just from the psychology perspective, knowing that there's this underlying process happening where the ego identifies with the outer world and there's this huge shift. It's literally kind of being reconfigured within us. So the ego is the part of our consciousness that allows us to know who we are, a sense of self, and have boundaries in the world and things like that. But if we have an identity that some would say is like a false identity, and which is very protective, usually it's usually protecting vulnerable parts of us, who we think we are, it will be more connected to how do I look, what is my role, how much money do I make, material sort of things, or very physical outward manifestations of things. Not that any of that's wrong, but if there is a deeper impulse that's saying there's more for you, it looks different, maybe you've fallen off path, or maybe those things have become too much of your priority or focus, I feel like there's something in there that will then indicate maybe what some of the intensity might look like as we're going through it. So some people are really good at just, okay, screw it, I'm going to let go. I'm going to surrender. It is what it is. And they, not that that's not challenging and difficult, it absolutely is, but maybe they don't have the that stripping away may not have to feel so unbearable. Maybe they're holding on a little less. When you use that example of a car accident, it's actually a really great one, because my husband went through that. And it was a very instantaneous shift, and it did alter him. And in his words, he would say that's exactly what happened, where the things he thought were important to him radically shift in that second. I think some of us, that same process might take days or weeks or even months. And it just will be not necessarily initiated by such a impactful situation. I think it can be both. I think your instinct, though, as you're listening, you just kind of you might feel it. You might just have a knowing. You might just have that, I really think that's what happened to me. I don't think it's a clear cut, like it fits in this box or this one, but that is a great question, because I think there's a little grayness in there for people who might feel like, well, the people around me said, what do you mean you were going through a hard time? Everything was fine. And you're like, are you kidding me? Like I was fighting for my life. So yeah, it's very internal for a lot of us. But of course, external events can be a catalyst, a loss of a child or a loved one, or a tragic situation, or even a situation that's asking you to expand. That's beautiful and magical, but you're afraid. You're holding on to who you think you are, not who you're becoming or being asked to evolve into. And that can be painful too.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've never actually put two and two together until you and I are talking, but there was a moment for me during COVID where it was like Groundhog Day. I'd wake up and every day was the same. My entire calendar got wiped clean. My husband was in healthcare, and so he was kind of doing his life was continuing, but my kid was home from school. My calendar got wiped, all my work got cleared out, and I'd wake up every day and it was the same. And I started getting really depressed. I don't think I had been depressed before this point, not like this. And there was a point where, it's so foggy and I don't remember it very well, but there was a point where I was laying on the top of our staircase on the floor and I was dead inside. And my kid came over and he looked in my face and I had this like, holy shit, I have got to get my life together. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I saw my kid's face. And I was like, yeah, it was just a holy shit moment. I need to help myself. I need to figure this out. And I did. I like immediately went and sought help and reached out and slowly started to pull myself out of that. And that's kind of what led me into plant medicine. And that was like this major trajectory. But when I think of my dark night of the soul, it's interesting. I think back to when I did the plant medicine, and it was that moment where the medicine hit me and I had this realization that I had been sleeping for God knows how long. I didn't know when I fell asleep. I didn't know how long I had been asleep. I didn't know what caused me to go to sleep, but I had been asleep, and the plant medicine like woke me up. But as you were talking, I was thinking back, it was that moment when I was laying there dying inside, and my poor kid looked at me, and I thought, there's no way that I can role model this, and I need to be there for him, and I need to
Wow.
fix myself so that I can be there for him. But I've never connected it all back to that moment.
Wow. That makes perfect sense to me, hearing it in that way. And it almost sounds like, some people, when they go through this experience, it's hard to push through. There can be that depression, there can be anxiety, there can be all of these panic attacks, all different types of things can unfold. But one of the things that seems to be kind of like a thread through it, that I think a lot of us, if we are blessed enough to have that kind of process show itself, is that there's something meaningful that sort of intervenes. And it was like your desire to, you found something meaningful where maybe you weren't able to connect with that within yourself at that moment, feeling dead inside, but could then latch on to borrowing it through your child, in a sense of giving meaning, right? Finding meaning, tapping back in. They've said this so much. There's all of these studies that have been done about what happens when we start to lack a sense of purpose or meaning in our lives. And it doesn't have to mean that like our sole purpose of like this one big grand gesture that's forever something we're meant to do, but even just the day to day. And I had that same feeling you had about Groundhog Day while I was sick too. It was depressing. It was like, is this all there is? But and even though today, my consciousness would say, oh my gosh, there was so much more. I have an amazing family and I have this and all of these wonderful things. But beneath that, there was this sense of, what is all of this for? And that felt really sad and defeating in that time. And I think one of the things I had described to a friend when I came out of it and it was finally getting back on my feet, it still took me months after it was all over with. I think it took about 6 months before I started to feel normal because I still had I had all sorts of stuff. I remember just saying to her, the most frightening part of that illness was how I didn't have a sense of hope. And I couldn't ever remember a time where even through the worst of the worst, there was something. So I love that your son, whether that was intuitive on his part or not, or you said kid, I'm assuming you mean son.
Yeah, little boy.
Just came over and locked eyes or saw you or whatever it was. And you just, that part of you borrowed that energy, that inspiration, that meaningfulness to pull yourself. But you also said something really amazing, which was I asked for help, right? Or I did the things that then could also help me. And I think for those listening, that's one of the hardest things for us to do because we can't always articulate those feelings, right? In this way, when we're talking now and kind of reflecting, it's one thing, but in those moments, I don't know how it felt for you, but I know I didn't have the words or the descriptions, or I couldn't conceptualize what I was feeling. I was just kind of at the whim of it all. Yeah, not really having the language or understanding to put it together to say, oh, that's what's happening, which then made it harder to know what I needed or how to advocate for myself or how to ask for help. So it's kind of like this strange place of when you need it the most, you also sort of feel the most disconnected from being able to do what you know works or reach for the help, or it's a really tricky place to be for sure.
Yeah, it feels disembodied.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Which is interesting because recently I was talking to one of my clients about one of her experiences she was having, and the way she was processing was a little bit disembodied. And so it's like, what can you do to get back in your body? Get your feet on the ground, go put your feet in the grass, run, move your body, dance. Like, how can you get into your body? And in those moments, when I think back at that time period, I was very disembodied. It was almost like an out of body experience. And there is a big difference between when you feel embodied and you feel connected, and it is muddy when you're in it. It is foggy. It's hard to see. It's hard to get perspective. For me, there was no real like root cause. I wasn't sick. It wasn't an accident. Just something fell apart in me, or maybe it had been slowly doing it over time. That's my guess. Actually, it was slowly over time. And then COVID I don't know, it nailed it in for me. But it is so hard to see what's happening when you're in it. And so I guess, how do we encourage people? How do we in those moments, how do we know what to do? I mean, extending a hand out is so hard when you can't even see what it is or what you need.
Yeah, that's a really great question. When I think back to like what would have helped or what did I have the capacity for, there was another experience. Well, actually, let me stay with this for a minute. So I did text people and I did say, I'm really not well. I'm sick. Even in that, I'll be honest and transparent and say I still was hiding a little bit, because
Mm-hmm.
even though when I said I'm not well, it was easier for me to say because I had this physical nature to what was going on.
Yeah.
If it were not for the physical body, my
Yeah.
physical body going through that process, it would have been harder for me to ask for help or to let people know. We have such a stigma around all of this, around feelings and around these processes. And I think that's why this is such a great conversation, because from the outside, it doesn't look like a lot may be happening for that person. But like, I like how you said something fell apart, because there is that sense too. For some of us, it's like, in tarot, they call it the tower moment, or the tower card, where things are just collapsing. And I do think there is a feeling of that we may have. And then in the process of the actual ego death itself, there are these different phases to it. There's many of them. One phase is disorientation, one phase is collapse. And so if you think about collapse, it could be the collapse of the identity, that feeling or sense of like who I thought or what I thought I wanted or how I thought this was going,
Yeah.
is no longer what it seems to be. And there
Mm-hmm.
is grief that can come with that. There's pain that can come with that. There's this sense of, like if you, an aspiration, let's say, that you thought was you're going to be your path of what you're going to be and how you're going to show up in life. And all of a sudden that kind of falls apart for whatever reason. The ego really struggles to understand, well, who am I now without this? So there can be
Yeah.
this deep grief of grieving not only that it's falling apart, grieving the future you now won't have with that in your life in that way. There's a lot of layers to it that I think also connect with our identity and our family influences. And so I'd say one of the first things to do is give yourself some grace. And yes, this is real. Yes, you are feeling these things. Um, Acknowledge that you're feeling these things, your experience. Validate yourself, I think, as much you can in the beginning of that, or while you're in that, because it can be hard for people outside of you when they're not feeling the depth of that. They might just think you're having a bad day, and you may not have the strength or the emotional capacity to say whatever it is you're actually feeling, because that just takes more energy. And to be honest, in those moments, you might not have much to give or feel like you do. So doing anything you can initially to sort of say, this is real. I'm going through this, and honoring and acknowledging that, as painful as it is, at least it kind of starts a process of, I'm not just avoiding whatever life, or this is something very real. It's okay that I don't know. It's okay that I'm afraid. It's okay. I don't know where this is going. Because part of the ego death through a Jungian lens is that the ego doesn't know. It doesn't know what's coming, right? We misinterpret that as danger. when the soul is like, oh, thank God, finally I can reach this person without that barrier, right? That's so what's really happening is the ego's losing its grip so that the soul can become more present. And
Mm-hmm.
once we get that, then we start to feel held in life again. We start to feel connected again. We start to feel so they do believe that there
Mm-hmm.
is a necessary process of separating instinct and intuition and connection from you while you're going through the depth of that experience. So when you feel, I don't have any more hope, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. What's happening to me? I feel like I've been abandoned by my higher power, my God, my source, my soul, whatever it is you identify with, connect to. Even though that feels so deeply painful, it's actually part of that orientation. There's a separation first so that the
Mm-hmm.
ego can shift, so it can be reborn and then deeply connected and emerged, embodied, as you said, with that soulfulness. So filling your life with the right people and circumstances that can be with you, and that might not be many people, might be one person that knows, that you can feel at least there's a lifeline here. You know, a therapist, of course, any type of help, professionals that can help you, absolutely, I would always suggest that. And I understand that sometimes we feel shame or we feel guilt or we feel uncertainty. We start comparing ourselves. Is my situation this bad? And so we don't reach out for help. I feel like that's actually more dangerous, is when we're in that space of in between, the letting people in, letting people be there for us. It's okay that they can't understand. It's okay that they're not in your shoes, that they're not living in that psyche as you're going through this collapse and this breakdown. And it's okay that you're afraid, but you don't have to do it alone. And that's different than, you can feel alone while you go through something. But if you have someone who's with you, talking to you, just checking on you, letting you know that you're loved, even if you can't receive that while you're in it, there's a little bit of a lifeline and a tether there. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really significant for people to find. And sometimes the honest truth is, we may not have that in our lives through a loved one or a family member. It is worth trying to find a therapist or counselor, healer, whoever
Mm-hmm.
that can be that for you for that time. That lifeline is really, really important. It keeps you anchored in this world while your known world is falling apart and being rebuilt through this process.
Yes, it's very common when we go through a depression that we go inward and we
Hmm.
withdraw. And what is
Yeah.
actually needed is this extension out and this connection to other people. So it's fighting against that instinct. Um, I want to touch on, I want to backtrack a little bit where we were talking about identity and ego. And I think that this is a fascinating aspect of it because of conditioning and all of the labels that we gather as we go through our life. It could be a wife, a mom, a CEO, a business owner, entrepreneur. Like, we gather all of these layers and all of these labels, and they become our identity. I am a mom. I am a podcaster. I am an author. Whatever these labels are, then we identify with them as if we are those labels. And then when one of those labels falls apart, like we are a CEO and we lose our job, and then we lose our financial status, or we, whatever these labels are, as they fall away, then our ego, we don't even know what we are without these labels. And there is this crisis of identity when we attach so heavily to these labels. And it sounds like this ego death and this process of dark night of the soul is realizing who we are when we shed all the labels. What are we underneath
Yes.
all of that? And it brings us back to that. So we're not attached to the outside of us. We come back to the center, to the core, to who we are.
Yes. Oh, I love how you just articulated that. I wholeheartedly agree. I actually have a really good example of this, which came before my dark night of the soul. I was a professional photographer for a long time. I did a lot of the same kind of shadow work and stuff like that behind the scenes. And I had clients I had been working with for quite some time. But I also had a photography business, and I would go to all of these spiritual events, and I was hired to basically capture the spiritual gurus and teachers and authors and speakers, who were there, and they were world renowned individuals, we'll just say. Um, and it was interesting because that job, it wasn't even really a job. I was a contractor, but I would be called into these events. And I was given these incredible privileges. I had the front row at every event. So while these amazing people who I had studied, who I had like read their books, purchased their program, gone to their retreats, here I was like sitting feet away from them, right? So already it was challenging me and showing me how much I was putting people on pedestals. But as a photographer, I was there to capture them, right? Get photos and make sure that I had the nice images and things of them speaking on stage and sharing their message. And when you're holding a camera in your hand, it's a really fascinating thing because you see so much more than what other people see. And I started to kind of identify with that role. It gave me status. It gave me money. It allowed me into green rooms with these well-known, highly sought after individuals. I felt special. I felt so important. And I was just traveling and doing all of these amazing things. And I also, toward the end of that career, hated it. I would just sit and cry at my computer while editing these people's faces. They wanted me to get rid of the bags under their eyes and make them look a certain way and all of this. And I felt like, isn't this interesting? This person is preaching about authenticity. And then here behind the scenes, I'm being berated for not making them look like a model. I thought, wow, this is, so, things like that started to happen. But the other thing that happened is I was allowed to go into these really interesting parties, let's just say, or spaces, after parties where it would just be for the speakers. And I was there to take photos. So I was one of the few staff allowed in to kind of see what was going on. And man, was it the quickest way to dethrone someone to realize like they are not who I thought they were. And all of that taught me about myself too. I had to get really clear that I was holding on to this role as this photographer because of like there were so many people that also wanted to work with me because they knew I had access to those people. And that really started to kind of mess with my head. I felt like, do you want to work with me because you believe in what I'm doing or what you think I can do for you based on that role? I had to confront so many shadow layers of that. And I had to look at how that was feeding my ego, being in the front of the room, being one of the first people let in while they're like, you would walk by a crowd of all these people and they'd like open the doors for you and they let you in and then they slam the door. And like all of these little things that seem very, like, oh, this is so exciting and so fun. I look back and I'm like, wow, I really felt so important. Now, I'm not trying to shame myself or say that I wasn't an important part of the process or that I didn't do good work, because I did do good work. But my ego over identified with the importance of all the external kind of stuff. And when I sat with myself at the end of the day, I was eating and drinking a lot because I really wasn't happy. I was pretending that I loved certain parts of the work that I absolutely hated. It felt like it was chipping away at my soul. And I stopped. I put the camera down and I quit. And I had to be in this very weird place of, who am I without this camera? Who am I now that I'm not being invited to these events anymore? Who am I now that they don't need me because I can't do this thing for them? And it really put me, I did go through a little bit of a depression, but I also felt more relief than I expected because my soul no longer felt like I was hiding this heavy burden beneath all this extra weight that I was carrying. Beneath the hiding behind this piece of equipment too that allows you to blend into the room so that you're not seen. So all of that it sounds superficial, and a lot of it was, to be honest, but the shift to release that role was a dark night of the soul. It brought me into places within myself where I realized, wow, I've been craving validation. I've been living for praise. I have been only feeling confidence and connection when somebody tells me how great I am and how amazing I made them look, or having this my photo, me in a photo with a celebrity, whatever. And that was the only way I felt important. I was so out of touch with my soul that when I let go of that identity and really got to know who I was, um, I felt free. I felt free, and I was able to look back and go, that was a fun time, but that did not even define who I was then, even though I thought it did.
Mm-hmm.
So for some of us, it can be, I'll give you just another brief example this time. But what happens in a different situation, right? I have worked with parents who have lost children. And the one of the questions is like, am I still a mom? My daughter passed away, and it's a heartbreaking, tragic experience filled with a range of emotions. And one of the things they are confronting within themselves is this role, this placement of, what do I do if my child's no longer in this world? Am I no longer a parent? And they grapple with these identities, and what it helps us to do is say, that role is deeper than that. It's what in Jungian work, we would say it's archetypal. We would say it is something that has a range of experience that can't be defined. It can't be pinned down. It doesn't end because your child moved on from this world. It never ends because you still love them. You still brought them into this world. You are forever connected to them. But we still grapple with these ideas of, what does it mean if I don't have that job? Or if I no longer am in that position? It helps us to get more in touch with, how do we hold the experience instead of over-identify with the label of it. So it's difficult, it's painful, and it's somehow filled with meaning if we let ourselves maybe see it differently, or come at it from a different angle too.
It makes me think, where do we get our value from? Is it intrinsic or is it extrinsic? And like, if I'm needing validation from my environment around me, as an employee, as a friend, as a person in a spiritual community, as an author, as a therapist, like, if I'm needing that constant validation to fill me up, then that can be easily shattered. But if I'm filling up from the inside within and doing these internal practices, then when the world around me shatters, I don't shatter with it. So like, what are we doing to come back to ourself? Meditation, journaling, going to therapy, reaching out and being a part of community. What can we do to continue to bring ourselves back so that when these things potentially shatter, we don't come down, the whole thing doesn't crumble in one piece?
Yes, I love that so much. And I think that's such a beautiful invitation to think about, what can I do, right? What can I do to navigate this? One of the things that helped me was nature. It sounds kind of funny, but nature, and back to that word archetypal, right? So Mother Nature, being held, being nurtured. If we're having a hard time asking for help or receiving that kind of care from people around us, we can go to nature in all different forms. And so what I did during some of the most difficult times, I wasn't able to do this when I was really sick, because I really had a hard time even just pulling myself out of bed, to be honest, let alone to use the restroom or shower, things of that nature. But a different period when I went through this, I would take midnight salt baths. It was the weirdest thing. I never had done that in my entire life. And here I found myself doing it like weekly for this period of like 6 months or so. But I would go into the bathroom. I would fill the tub. I would shut all the lights off. It would be late, like I said, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I would crack the window a little bit. And while I laid in the tub, the hot water, the salt, it worked on me in some way. I know it was doing something physical, but I think it also emotionally was helping me to purge and to release what I didn't even know I was holding. I opened the window to let a little bit of the breeze in, but what was unexpected was the sound of the crickets. And
Mm.
I can't explain to you why, and I'm sure there's some kind of scientific thing to this, or maybe not, but maybe it's just a spiritual thing. I don't know. But while I would lay in that tub and I could feel the tears coming, moving down my face, there wouldn't necessarily always be an inner reason why. I didn't always have a story, a trigger, something saying like, you're emotional because of it. I just felt like I was constantly processing. When I heard the crickets, I had this really strange sort of intuitive feeling of like, just let that sound carry away whatever it is that you're releasing right now. And I would lay in that tub and I would breathe. I'd feel the hot water. I'd feel the tears on my face. I'd listen to those crickets. And it was the weirdest thing. And it felt like medicine. And I was like, I can't
Mm-hmm.
articulate what or why, but I knew it was good for my soul. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you'll be just so surprised by what it is that might help you or support you. It doesn't have to make sense to other people, but trust your intuition. And I know that while you're in the midst of those moments, it'll feel like you're disconnected from it, because you are a little bit, essentially, depending on the circumstance. But there still will be these little synchronicities or these little hints that are kind of like the breadcrumbs that you follow. And that was one of them. It was like, just get in the tub. And my
Mm-hmm.
logical mind wanted to be like, you're going to wake everybody up. This is absurd. What are you doing? You've got an early morning. Like, your head comes in, tries to talk you out of what you're feeling. But I would get in that tub and it felt like a cathartic release. It's the only way I could describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I would just sob. Sometimes I would just lay there. Sometimes I would go into like spontaneous breath work kind of patterns and things. Sometimes I would go into a little visualization of my mind. But a lot of times it was me in the dark, the hot water, and the crickets through the window.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
bizarre, but worked.
But in that moment, you're connecting with yourself. You're connecting with your feelings. You're expressing them. You're allowing that to happen. You're connecting to nature. You're connecting to your breath. You're connecting to the water. You're connecting to your
Yeah.
senses. What you weren't doing was smoking weed and scrolling on social
Right.
media and sitting in front of a TV and numbing out
So true.
and you know like binge eating and distracting yourself away from all of that. So the
Yeah.
strength in that is actually sitting through the discomfort, which is shadow work, is
Yeah.
sitting with the pain and feeling it and integrating it and allowing it to infuse your system so that it can move through. And what our tendency to do in those situations is to numb out and to push it away and to get as far away from it as we can because we don't want to feel it. And then what happens is instead of it coming out in a healthy way, it comes out sideways. It comes out in anger. It comes out in depression. It comes out completely sideways until we're ready to sit with it. And um and I think maybe sometimes we don't know this, but if we are able to sit through that pain and that discomfort, there is light on the other side. But there's no way to get to that light without moving through the darkness, without moving through the pain, without feeling it. And there's so much I know this tendency or this wish or desire to move to the other side, but you can't
Yeah.
skip the step of feeling. And I think and that you can't bypass. You can't bypass
Right.
that one. Mhm.
It's so true. Thank you for that. That's really well articulated, that giving language to those processes. And I hadn't really thought about how it actually was a connection. It's interesting because my mind felt like it was the opposite at the time. Like, I felt so disconnected that here I am,
Mhm.
submersed in this hot water and in this frantic place of not knowing what's happening and opening a window. And but you're right, because when I think back, it's like I stayed with myself. In alchemy, we talk a lot about, being this vessel. Life is just putting things in front of you and you're going through these ordeals and these challenges. And if we learn to kind of be this vessel where we put the lid on and we let the heat build and we let the tension grow and we stay with the problem or the challenge, that the chemical process that's happening within ourselves and in our life eventually will become transformative. But a lot of times we pop the lid off before that pressure can build. So we're constantly escaping, or we're constantly, I like how you said the scrolling and the mindless, and we know that difference. We know the difference between a little bit of decompression, just kind of vegging out, watching something a little bit versus that being the mode, and being really disconnected. And I think that's a really helpful point for people to recognize. Like, you can choose things where you're not solving your situation necessarily. Maybe you haven't figured out the resolution or what's to come next, but you're staying with it. And I think that is one of the most powerful things we can do. I actually have a little note on my desk and I look at it every single day. And when I was writing my dissertation, it was probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to do, because I won't go into detail, but it's about psychopathy and the Western shadow. And I used a serial killer as an example. And it was one of the most challenging couple of years of my life to be immersed in that body of work. And my professor said something to me that has changed my life. And he probably thought he was just suggesting some like helpful writing advice. And I've taken it as life advice. But he was like, Melissa, just deepen, don't solve. And I was like, ooh. And so I have a little sticky note which says, deepen, don't solve. And so when I find myself floundering or uncertain, or what am I doing, or how's it, let me just dink it, just deepen. So to me, what that means is, can I actually just sink a little deeper into this messiness? Because I'm not going to get stuck in it. If I sink into it, I'm actually going to move through it in a weird way. But if I keep avoiding, I'm going to be hovering over the surface, and it's like something's going to keep trying to pull me in. If I just sink right in, I'll get what I need. I'll figure it out. I'll move where I need to go. But otherwise, there's so much resistance. And I think that's one of the hard things for us too, is we don't want to surrender when we're in these processes. We fear that. We think that might mean death, or we take that to mean weakness or something else, right? All these associations. But surrender through a very Jungian perspective is what teaches your ego how to receive. So when you surrender, it means the ego doesn't know, because the soul does. So when the ego is learning to receive, it basically means it's letting more information in. It's allowing you to see, sense, and feel more, versus when we're super protective and afraid, our lens narrows. We're hypervigilant to the dangers, the threats, what is known, and we hold on. But when we're deepening, when we're surrendering, we're essentially saying, I don't know. And that's a beautiful thing. It doesn't feel good, but it's a beautiful thing, because that means what's to follow isn't known, which means it's not from the ego. It's going to be from the soul. And it'll create an opening for us in that way.
Yes. And with that comes like some deeper level of trust that moving through that will bring what we're needing. Yeah.
Yes. It'll bring what we're needing.
I have a million more questions, and I think what people need to do is stay tuned, because I feel like you and I need to work together. I don't know if that's with podcasting or workshops or something, but you and I are meant to do some work together. So people need to stay tuned for that. But tell people about your book and how people can connect to you. And of course, I'm going to drop that in the show notes. But how exciting, and congratulations, because it just got launched.
Thank you. Thank you. So, book number 2 is called Esoterica, A Shadow Worker's Codex, and it's launching now. We're kind of like in the pre-launch phase. So, it'll be out officially in bookstores in a couple of months, but you can pre-order. And it's basically what was going to be a card deck, we've turned into a book initially. And it's kind of going to be a combination of a shadow worker's toolkit in the form where you can also flip it open and see where it lands like an oracle. So it's this combination of both. But it talks about these different processes and principles. So we talk about dark night of the soul. We talk about shedding and collapsing and all of that from a very emotional and psychological approach. But we also talk about like these patterns of being a shadow worker and what that means for some of us, and how some of the historical ways this might have shown up in our childhood to show that we were the kind of people that can hold these kind of conversations and engage with the darker material and find the invisible light that is within it all. So it's a really beautiful book. I can't even wait. I've been able to even hold it in my hands yet because it's still en route. But I just can't wait. And I think it's going to be such a powerful toolkit for people who, whether you are new to this work or you're a seasoned shadow worker, I really think there's going to be a lot of amazing and wonderful things. And if you are struggling, or if you're finding yourself going through the dark night of the soul and you just want to understand, I've written in length as well about that in the book, because I feel like sometimes knowledge gives us that little bit of insight, right? Until we can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, or we can kind of understand what we're going through. Sometimes when somebody gives you a little piece of information and says, oh, I can understand, like I'm not in your shoes and that's your story and your situation, and I can empathize with you. And just so you know, what you're experiencing also might be this. There's so much hope in that, because then we can feel a little more like, oh, there's a language for this, a process for this, or a place to kind of make sense of it a little bit, so we feel less alone. So that's kind of my hope as well with the book. So thank you for allowing me to share it. And I agree, stay tuned, because we're seeding these lovely ideas about future collaborated, kind of opportunities and what it is that we'll do. In fact, if people have ideas that could be fun too, like, hey, we'd love to see you guys do this, that might be fun as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. I know I'm going to see more of you. I know there's going to be more of it. Thank you for being in my life and for sharing your wisdom. I love it.
Oh, I feel the same way. I love how we have like such parallel, like different ways that we approach the work, but I feel like you give a voice to some of the things like I'm thinking and putting together in my own way. And you just say it in such like a precise, awesome, clear way that I think is so helpful for people to hear. Because this stuff can get so messy and muddled. So it's nice that you're kind of like this lighthouse, right, that shines through it all. It's really amazing.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Community Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I can be found at www.nickyyoga.com, NICKYYYOGA.com. Until I see you again next week, I hope you have a beautiful day.